Boom shakalaka, testing 1 2 3, testing testicles. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, brothers and sisters around the world, it is your boy Chris Shule, aka the Esoteric Noetic, aka the Chocolate Nubian Soul Brother from Ghana, West Africa, dropping the wisdomatic truth bombs. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, click on the bell, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your momos, drop us the comments and let us know what it is. And be sure to check out my new book, Vegan Prince, Warrior King. Speaks about being a warrior in this crazy world and also being a warrior to the most beautiful beings that we share this planet with, the Earthlings. Not just you and me, not just the humans, but also the animals, all beings. Freedom is the birthright of all sentient beings. I often like to say, ladies and gentlemen, we do not truly have a freedom movement unless we have a freedom movement that encompasses the freedom for all. Even those weird green-haired leftists out there that want to take away all our freedoms. They deserve the freedom as well. Ladies and gentlemen, all right, I want to talk about a topic that everyone loves to talk about. It's the most beautiful topic because it brings lots of people together. It's even more cohesive than politics. This is the topic of religion, right? Everyone loves to talk about how they love religion, right? And how it all brings us together. You see, this is the problem in the world, that there's so many different religions out there, and rather than having this transcendental attitude where we say, I respect your beliefs, and you try to focus on the unifying ideas within religion, which are love towards all beings, which is this understanding that there is a higher force out there, God, Krishna, Buddha, Allah, that unites us all. No, that doesn't seem to happen in the world. More often than not, people speak about how their religion is the right religion, and if you do not believe in my religion, well, you will be burnt at the stake. What is this? You speak of some witchcraft. I must burn you at the stake. This has been the history of the world. More often than not, we would see many of these religious organizations. I mean, this is the history of Christianity. This is the history of most religions. These religious organizations would often persecute people because they did not share the same beliefs that were perpetuated within their religion. And as a result, it brings about divide. Even in this day and age, this age of freedom, well, supposed freedom, we still have this tremendous divisiveness. We still have wars being carried out. And granted, we don't say that these wars are necessarily based off of religious ideals, but religion is not just about the supernatural belief system that there is some higher power out there. Religion is anything that is restrictive, binds you to a way of thinking, is dogmatic. It's not based off of objective truth, but on blind faith. I guess we need to start this podcast by talking about what religion is, right? I'm a big stickler for definitions. What is religion? I mean, if you have a look at your basic Google search, most people would define religion, I believe. Let's have a look. Let's define religion for me, Google. Okay. The belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. So it's belief in a supernatural power, right? A particular system of faith and worship. So it's typically something that denotes belief in a higher power. It deals with the concept of an organization that has set itself up with certain ideals in regards to what reality is, based off of things that can't necessarily be proven with our observation, but require us to believe, requires faith. At least this is the typical definition that is given. But you have a look at the etymology of religion. We find what the roots of this thing tie back to, and you can find that this is derived from the Latin word relegare, which means to bind back, to hold, to restrict. It's a way of thinking. It's basically authoritative structure that says this is the truth, and if you go against the truth, well, you're going to have to suffer repercussions. And you have a look at what we have going on in the world right now, the forms of thinking we have. And you could argue that they very much are religious. They may not necessarily deal with supernatural forces, but in the original sense of the word, they're restricted. They basically require you to pay allegiance to a way of thinking. And if you question the narrative, if you question the boom shakalaka, you know what I'm talking about. If you question the science, well, then you are a heathen. You shall be burnt at the stake, right? When there is no religion higher than truth. You see, I like to distinguish between religion, spirituality, and consciousness. I see religion as being one person that is working under religion, being caught up in this bubble. Then, of course, you have someone outside of this bubble that is thinking in a less restrictive way, looking at things within a spiritual mindset, being caught up in a more expansive way of looking at the world. They're not trapped within one way of seeing things. And then beyond that, we have something that transcends all of that. I'd say consciousness. It's not, because even within the spiritual mindset that I find within the New Age community, there are very restrictive ideas. People like to put these ideas in regards to what the truth is and say, oh, I feel like this is the truth. People don't believe in reason, logic. And as a result, they buy into a lot of airy-fairy notions of what spirituality is. But the truth is that real truth is not religious and it's not spiritual. It's based off of the truth. The truth remains the truth regardless of how many people support it. You see, the scientific process of arriving at truth was at the heart of what spirituality was in the ancient world. And it's funny how we look at how science has been ossificated to the point now where science, which used to be spiritually based, used to be based off of concepts dealing with metaphysical principles as well as principles governing the physical world, and would use the scientific approach to arrive at these things. But now it's been ossificated into a system where we don't look at things through reason and logic. In fact, science of the ancient world was essentially what we call the occult. In fact, you have a look at science in this day and age, and it has its origins from all these occult teachings. If we're going to go through the history of science, and this is all necessary in order for us to get a clear understanding of the history of religion, the history of spirituality, the history of consciousness, we need to look at the origins, where all this stuff comes from, science. And you find that even the mechanisms of science that we have, whether that's alchemy, that's chemistry, these all come from Hermetic principles, from the land of Chem. Thus the word alchemy, chemistry. Chem was the ancient word for Egypt, Kemetic knowledge. This is where we get so much of this information from. And the first movers of the scientific way of thinking, they were actually occultists. They were people that had studied this occult knowledge from Chem. Sir Francis Bacon, who was credited as being the founder of the scientific method, it may surprise a lot of people to realize that this guy was a mystic. Sir Francis Bacon was someone that very much believed in higher powers, was very, very much what a lot of people would call a spiritual hippie. This is the founder of the scientific method, understood in many of these principles, but also believed in logic and reason. So when I say principles, I'm talking about the Hermetic principles, the law of cause and effect. I mean, this stuff can all be traced to the land of Chem. There is a history here. So much of what we have within the current world can all be traced back to the land of ancient Egypt and further. In fact, religion, real religion, which is truly supposed to encompass not any restricted way of thinking, but encompasses science, encompasses spiritual concepts, encompasses consciousness. It has its roots within the ancient world. All of this stuff, even the Bible, interestingly enough, and I know a lot of people, when they think of God, when they think of religion, they think of the Judeo-Christian ethic, and they think the Bible is the most definitive account of religion, when in actual truth, I mean, you have to think about the people that actually wrote the Bible if you want to get to the heart of what the Bible is about. And the Bible was not written by God per se. I mean, I know a lot of Christians say that the Holy Spirit was working through the people that wrote the Bible, when in actual fact, the Bible has been rewritten many, many times using the Pesher technique, where you tend to embellish ideas, It's been translated many times, but you have its origins during the Temple of Nicaea, Constantinople, essentially forming these ideas, these taking concepts from various parts of the world that were going to be implemented within the Bible. I mean, this is where we see the conventional Bible, but if we go back further, we'll find that the first people that would actually bring about the concepts which paved the way for the Bible, these were the Phoenicians. You can trace this back to 100 AD to 900 AD. And I say this because when you have a look at the Bible and you have a look at many of the passages within this stuff, it is very clear to anyone that has researched history to see that there are striking similarities to ancient texts. Everything from prayers, even the classic prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You have a look at the ancient prayer dating back many, many thousands of years ago before Jesus Christ even. This stuff is found within Assyria. This stuff is found within Mesopotamia. We got Billy B. Steens that's making a reference to the Bible coming from Assyrian knowledge here. And yes, this stuff can be found within the Enuma Elish. And when you have a look at all these different passages, for instance, the story of Adam and Eve, and you see the same story written about in the Enuma Elish, they speak about Eden, you realize that, these guys are basically plagiarizing this stuff, all right? Or at the very least, I mean, come on, they've taken concepts and they have repackaged this stuff. So if we're going to have a look at the most original versions of what we call the Bible, you can find that the ancient Phoenicians, who were followers of Thoth, the Hermetical sciences, essentially they're the original gangsters of the Bible. So when you trace back the Bible, when you trace back this knowledge, whether it's the Judeo-Christian ideas that we take within the Western world, you can trace much of this knowledge to ancient Egypt and further back to the writings of a man known as Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus is a word that is a name that we seem to have forgotten in the Western world. However, this guy, in the same way that, I guess in a way, Nikola Tesla has been forgotten, but was responsible for so many of the things that shaped technology, the man that was even more responsible for the things that shaped not only the technology, but the science, the spirituality, the religion of the world, was a man by the name of Hermes Trismegistus. Now, there are many historians that say that we don't know if this guy existed, but if you follow the writings of Manly P. Hall, and I'm a big student of Manly P. Hall, I've gone through all of his works, which is no small task, that I assure you. I was brought up listening to his lectures, and this guy is the magnum opus when it comes to knowledge about history and various figures. But he speaks about, and this stuff is recorded, you can cross-reference this information, that Hermes Trismegistus, we know that his temple was found by Alexander the Great. Not his temple, essentially his burial. And we know this because it had written within the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, something that we account to Hermes Trismegistus, which is as above, so below. But this man very much existed. I believe that he very much did walk among the earth. And the teachings that we have that shaped religion, that shaped many of the concepts we have in the modern world, come from this guy, Hermes, that was known as the thrice great Atlantean priest king. Manly P. Hall speaks about how essentially Hermes was considered thrice great because he was a master of the science, the technology, and the spiritual concepts. He was a master of these three disciplines that lay the foundation for the nature of reality. Others claim that he was thrice great because this guy was born many times. When we think about the concept of rebirth, most of us, in the same way that I'm sure a few hundred years ago, only a few hundred years ago, it doesn't feel that long ago, but a few hundred years ago, people would look at the technologies that we have in the 21st century, and they would think of this as being impossible. The idea that I'm broadcasting this information to you live, it's mediated telepathy. It is the stuff of gods. Most people in that time, a few hundred years ago, would have looked at that and thought it was ridiculous. You can't do that. If I had told them that I had the ability to do that, if I had the ability to fly fighter jets or to travel long distances on a unicycle, they would think it was magic. Well, when you realize that there are technologies that the ancient world, people like Hermes possessed many, many thousands of years ago that surpassed even the technology that we're at now, you realize that the idea of being able to transmigrate your consciousness from body to body is not so crazy. It's only a matter of time if the human race, the human species doesn't blow itself up, I believe. It's only a matter of time before we master being able to conquer even this physical meat bag, this suit that we're using to experience reality, and can actually extend our lives for many, many thousands of years. But I say this because Hermes Trismegistus speaks about within his writings, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, speaks about how essentially he had seen the rise and fall of civilizations many times because he'd mastered the ability to transfer his consciousness to other bodies and would essentially live for thousands of years. And it sounds ridiculous, but when you look at so much of the evidence to support this, so much of the records, if you have a look at the Assyrian records, the Babylonian kings, we realize that there were times when these people were living for much, much longer than the average man. The time frame of 80 to 100, maybe 120 years was more equivalent to maybe 10 years for them. These people were living for, you have a look at the records showing how long many of these Babylonian kings lived. And we're speaking about people that lived for thousands of years. They'd somehow either genetically manipulated themselves to live longer, or they'd somehow mastered the ability to extend to transfer their consciousness into different bodies. And Thoth speaks about this ability. Thoth speaks about how he'd essentially done this many times. That's why he was known as the thrice great. Many times he'd come into this planet and had achieved many different things. And I say all this stuff because so much of what we see within the current world, so much of the knowledge is of such tremendous complexity that it's the work of someone that obviously had a lot of time in his hands. I mean, this guy was responsible for building the pyramid. He speaks about how, this is Hermes Trismegistus, mind you, he's responsible for the building of the pyramid, was responsible for so many of the sciences that we see in the ancient world. This can be tied back to Hermes, the technology of the ancient Egyptians, of the Babylonians, the sixth decimal system, the astrology that we use, the 12 zodiacs. Initially, there were 13. All this stuff can be assigned to the works of these figures. All this stuff can be tied to Atlantis. And it's interesting. It's one thing if I was to rely on one civilization, one account of a civilization speaking about their knowledge and figures like this, but there are many, many civilizations that speak about a man that brought about so much knowledge. And there are striking similarities to Hermes Trismegistus. We know that the Mayans, the Aztecs, they'd speak about a man by the name of Quetzalcoatl. And this all corresponds to the works of Hermes Trismegistus. There are figures all around the world that speak about the empire that we refer to as the empire of the ancient world. And when you delve into this area of study, you realize that this figure, if you believe in his writings, if you believe in this information, this guy was quite possibly the most pivotal figure. It'd be basically the personification of the closest thing to the Christ consciousness. Now, that being said, I believe personally that there are many people that have come onto this planet and have done amazing work, bringing about knowledge, uplifting the vibration of the planet. And I mean, classically, Pythagoras, and it's interesting, Pythagoras actually went to Egypt to study the mysteries, which are obviously based on Thoth's teachings, but in the Western world, and this is all traceable, this doesn't require any stretch in your imagination like believing in Hermes Trismegistus. We know that in the ancient world, we can trace the origins of science to philosophy to Pythagoras, essentially the philosophical tradition of where we get the mysteries from. So all of this secret knowledge is actually tied to Pythagoras. He was the founder of the musical scale, the founder of science, physics, he called it physikoi, but also metaphysics. Then we have people like Plato, Aristotle. These people basically learned from the master, Pythagoras. We can trace all this information to these figures, then of course to Sir Francis Bacon. But there are all these figures that have paved the way in bringing about an efflorescence of consciousness, spiritual enlightenment. Other figures like Buddha, other figures like Krishna, Allah. I mean, take your pick. I truly believe there are many people that have come onto this planet and have lifted the vibration of the planet, but often, like we do in this day and age, we learn from people that came before us and we add to that. More often than not, none of the creations that we have are truly original because they're built off of the creations of others. But at least in the Western world, we can trace so much of this information to Hermes. And this is at the heart of that which we call true religion. And it's interesting when we have a look at figures like Sir Francis Bacon speaking about religion, because this guy, as I say, is the founder of the scientific method, which is essentially, at least in the mainstream worldview, is the antithesis of religion. It's based off of reason, logic. This is a man that said a little bit of knowledge will lead you to atheism, but a tremendous amount of knowledge will lead you to God. Here is a man that spent a tremendous amount of his life researching the mysteries of the universe, was a scientist, someone that broke down things, didn't look at things in this airy-fairy manner, would actually try to understand why things work, had an understanding of the metaphysics, and also an understanding of the logical, philosophical approach to understanding things, the scientific method, and arrived at the fact that fundamentally, when you really study the building blocks of reality, you realize that at some point, there is some intelligent force that is governing this Euclidean meat space. It cannot be explained within the rationale of the materialistic worldview. He realized that there is some intelligent force, and it's that which we call God. And the biggest indicator of this to me is what you call the cosmological argument. The sheer fact, the word Allah is derived from the word Allah, Allah meaning true universal God. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have different words to refer to as God. In the ancient Egyptian language, the word Amen means light God. Now, in regards to Amen-Ra, now this was an actual figure that was responsible for doing some crazy things, but fundamentally you find that the terms that we use for certain figures that we refer to as God, they're different. They're different names, but they're all making homage to a universal figure, or to the idea, the concept that there is some intelligent force within the universe. Allah, God, Krishna, Buddha. I mean, this is all making reference to the centropic force. Centropy is the opposite of entropy. Entropy, obviously, is this idea that everything is getting less and less complex. It's a physics term, right? And centropy is this idea that you have a look at the building blocks of reality, and there is some kind of force, some kind of inherent intelligence within the universe that is bringing about an efflorescence of consciousness, more complexity. If you have a look at the scientific approach to looking at the world, we have amoebas that are formed that become more complex, that bring about more sophisticated organisms that eventually create. And I don't necessarily buy into this theory, but it is clear to say that if you have a look at evolution, we're seeing things become more complex. It's weird. It's almost like a paradox. On one hand, we are seeing entropy, but on the other hand, we are also seeing centropy. And I think the centropic nature of the universe, because the very fact that you are here means that there are things that came, but there are 100% things that came before you, things that were arguably less complex. And you have a look at the process of evolution in life, and we go through these ebbs and flows where things become more complex or more sophisticated. We see entropy, and then we see centropy. It goes in, it goes out. In the Vedic scripture, they speak about this as the breath of life. When they're speaking about Brahma, there's this concept, essentially how when you have a look at the universe, it's like this breath where in one breath you're breathing centropy, and another breath entropy. We're seeing this rise and fall of society, or what we call life. And to me, this shows the fact that there is some kind of order, there is some kind of system within the universe. But back to my point in regards to the cosmological argument, the sheer fact, the most powerful concept to me, making it very clear this is not something built of air and imagination, that there is some kind of inherent intelligence within the universe, regardless of whether or not you want to call this a religious idea, a spiritual idea, or an idea dealing with consciousness. It is the idea that there are things that came before us. The fact that there is something as opposed to nothing. It's known as the cosmological argument. Why is there something? Why is there anything? The fact that there had to be something, there had to be some great mover, the alpha, the omega, at some point. There must have been something that was there. We speak about this concept of the Big Bang. It's funny because that came about as a joke, right? I think it was, don't quote me, but I think it was a Fred Hoyle. Let me see if I can confirm this. But the point is that the concept came about as a joke. The idea that suddenly there was this Big Bang and then we see the universe. Yeah, so it was Fred Hoyle. So this is an astronomer that came about with the concept of the Big Bang. When you actually have a look at that idea with logic and reasoning, though, the idea that we can have something come from nothing is something that our human minds can even make a mockery of. Something must come from something. You cannot have nothing create something. And this is an idea that for some reason has been pushed more recently within the scientific academia, the idea of something coming from nothing. The actuality is there must be something that was there. And this is the cosmological argument. The sheer fact that we know that something, that we are here, means there must have been some original creator, some original gangster. The OG. And that is what I'm referring to as God, or Allah, as Billy in the feed was referring to. And fundamentally, this is at the heart of what we call spirituality. The fact that we know that by virtue of the fact that we are here, we have consciousness. It is evident that there is some aspect of us that lives on. And it's interesting when we have a look at quantum mechanics. This to me is the future of religion and spirituality. I see the future as being a culmination of the spiritual science as well as the science, the logical rationale, measuring, using the apparatus that we have in order to actually formulate an idea as to what reality is. And you have a look at quantum mechanics, and within quantum mechanics, we realize that many of these concepts that seem to be built of air and imagination are in fact based in real science. The fact that at the very building block of reality, we're not even here. We're non-local. What you are seeing around you, this projection, me even, obviously I'm not there when you're looking at me right now. These are just zeros and ones. But even if you were here in the flesh, take it from me, and you were looking at me, I'm not really here, at least the real me. Granted, there's this projection of me, this light projection, but the real me is non-local. And what that means is, in quantum mechanics, they found that the very building blocks of what we call reality, matter, that make up the things that we observe as reality, they are fluctuating in and out of this local environment. They're non-local. At the very building block, we're seeing these smallest particles, electrons, or whatever they might be, fluctuating in and out of reality, coming from a non-local point. That means they're not even coming from this visible universe. That means at the source of what creates everything that we experience within this Euclidean meat space, it is not even coming from a physical point. It is what I would call the spiritual, that which is not locatable within the physical reality. That means that the very nature, science is proving time and time again that the concept of spirituality is not something that is built of air and imagination, but is an actual fact based on true science. True science, and this will be my last point that I want to make about this. True science encompasses spirituality, encompasses consciousness. It's not about limiting yourself to certain ideas. You see, whereas the religious mentality is to stick to one idea and not want to listen to anything else because it makes you feel uncomfortable. This is what I'm defining as religion. I realize a lot of people define religion in different ways, but this is what I see within the current establishment. They're unwilling to look at any concept because, look, the science is settled, mate. No, look, I don't listen to all your conspiracy theories. Look, the boom shakalaka is safe. No, real science is constantly reevaluating its default position. It's open enough, not so much that it gets an open infection, but it's open in order to reassess ideas. It's this free marketplace of ideas that we look at any idea to see whether or not it has substance. Granted, with the scientific method, we use apparatus in order to prove if this thing is legitimate, which has problems. I'm not a big fan of the current scientific method because they're minimizing the understanding that there are things that we cannot observe within the apparatus that we use. The metaphysicians, the occultists of the ancient world, realized that there are many things that cannot be observed in this Euclidean meat space. People like Helena Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society, she would often say that there is no religion higher than truth. And if you truly want to understand the truth, realize that it sometimes can't be encapsulated within your scientific method process. If something is true, it is true. If something is proving time and time and time again to be true, regardless of what your ideals may be, what your religion may say about it, we have to accept that as the truth. And to me personally, when you have a look at real science, I mean, this is the science of the ancient world. This is going to the OG Hermes Trismegistus. It dealt with the process of empiricism. It's derived from the word scientia, which is the idea of, it comes from the root word scire, which is basically a process of empiricism, which is observing this Euclidean meat space through experience in order to ascertain what is real, rather than, let's say, using measuring devices that don't always prove to be that accurate. It's using your experience. There are many ways to derive at the truth through experience. One is through what we call Gnosis. This is what the ancient Gnostics, these were the original gangsters of what we call Christianity, would use. And it deals with the latent consciousness that is inherent within the sentient being, man. It deals with nous, which is a word for God. It's this inner divine understanding of that which is real. And these people would derive what is real through their inner understanding. It requires this ability to go in yourself to understand what is actually the stuff of reality. Because I truly believe that there is an aspect of us. There's a blueprint. There is something within each and every single being that recognizes the truth. And when we delve into ourselves deep enough, we can recognize the truth. It's when when you hear something that you haven't heard in a long time and you know it's true, you just know it's true. It's that inner divine knowing. And it's not blind faith. It's something that you've experienced time and time again. And when you come across it, you know it to be true. You may have forgotten it, but it has a familiarity. It's a deja vu. It's gnosis. There is the process of philosophy, which deals with the trivium, reason, logic, input, output, logic. This deals with the process of deriving the truth through logic, reasoning. And then, of course, there is the scientific method. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is that there are many ways for deriving the truth, but they deal with the process of empiricism, using your experiences, using your faculties in order to arrive at what the truth is. And this is true science. The science that we have in the current world simply uses one approach, the scientific method, which, don't get me wrong, can be very effective, but does not always address what the truth actually is. But ladies and gentlemen, real truth is not limited by any particular religion or system. The truth of the ancient world that dealt with the occult knowledge, that which is hidden, was considered hocus pocus because people did not understand it. And we still have the same thing going on in the 21st century. We have esoteric knowledge that is actually very, very high science, dealing in quantum mechanics, that is not understood by the general masses. And we have truths that are observable by anyone that has common sense, right? However, the vast majority of people, because they are so unwilling to look at the truth, because it doesn't resonate with their worldview, don't open themselves up to the truth. And this is what we currently have in the scientific system. It's not true science. It's not true spirituality. It certainly isn't true consciousness, expansive knowledge. It's scientism. It's the religion of science, which is the worst kind of science. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there. That is me ranting about science, religion, spirituality, and getting at the heart of what this is all about, which is truth. There is no religion higher than truth. Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, be sure to give us a like, tell your mom, tell your friends, drop us the comments, let us know what it is. Would really appreciate the comments, guys. I definitely enjoy reading your comments, and I will respond to them if they're not rude. And until next time, remember there are three things that cannot remain hidden for long: the sun, the moon, the truth. Remember to illuminate your minds with wisdom, strengthen your will with love, purge all negative thought patterns from your existence, and peace be upon your butt cheeks. Oh, and check out my book. I got a book out, Vegan Prince Warrior King. And check out my music. I'm on the Spotify's. I'm on iTunes. You can come to my gigs if you check us out on Crystal.com. Surya Namaskar. Namaste. Kisses, hugs, and belly rubs.